Bible Alive, the Gospel according to John, Hymn of the Logos, Part 2. What you see on the screen is what we're going to be talking about today. The following presentation would be impossible without these resources. And especially these resources. I keep promising you I'm going to give you a printout of a bibliography. My sister, God bless you. It's coming. It is coming, I swear. I will deliver. This Bible Alive series is about becoming considerate Bible readers to our Middle Eastern ancestors in the faith. This Bible Alive series is about offering a social science commentary on the Gospel called John. It's also about presenting an historically sensitive, cross-cultural, comparative set of glasses or lenses with which to read the Bible. First, we have our American glasses. Then we've got another pair of glasses called Mediterranean glasses from the first century. And then we got a special set of glasses we need for John called the Johannine glasses. Johannine anti-society glasses that key us in on anti-language. So, the comparative set of lenses from which to see and hear and read the Gospel of John as its original audience did. This Bible Alive series is about attempting to interpret John in a way that would be fair to its original author and audience, our biblical ancestors in the faith, our Johannine ancestors in the faith. And finally, this Bible Alive series is about maintaining attention, interest on important features of our own modern world. Let's begin. You're going to be seeing a lot of this text, folks. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, the prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was turned toward God, and what God was, the Word also was. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. What took place in him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was Ioannes. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. The true light that enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not. He came to his own home, and his own people received him not. But to those who received him, who believed into his name, he gave power to become teknepheu, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of a man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the fullness of a gift that is truth. We have gazed upon his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. Ioannes bore witness to him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, for he was before me." And from his fullness have we all received a gift in place of a gift. For the law was given through Moses. The gift that is the truth came through Jesum Christum. No one has ever seen God. The only Son who is turned toward the Father, he has made him known. Let's break down again the Gospel according to John in a simple outline form and see what we're going to be navigating through today. Here is an outline of the structure of the fourth gospel. Prologue, hymn of the Logos, a poem about the Messiah's cosmic status, which we just read. That can be subdivided into three parts. The part that's highlighted in red, the incarnation of the Word, chapter 1, verses 6 through 14, is what we are going to be covering today. We're going to be spending 5 weeks on this poem. And in reality, everything we do in the Gospel according to John, except probably the last couple classes, are going to be very heavily diving into these 18 verses, because really, all the information that John wants to give us is to be found in these 18 verses. Everything after is just a rehash, crabgrass, recycling, restatement, over-lexicalization of the same themes that get explored, get expressed and stated in the first 18 verses. The second part is the book of signs. It's a large chunk of literature, chapter 1, verse 19 to chapter 12, verse 50. Book of 3 is the book of glory. Part 3 is the book of glory. Chapter 13, verse 1, with the foot washing all the way through the passion and resurrection account. In chapter 20, verse 31. Chapter 20, verse 31 is the original ending, scholars believe, of the Gospel of John. It's where it ended originally. There was no chapter 21. There was no feed my sheep, Peter. There was no what's going to happen to the beloved disciple, you know. You don't worry about that. You just follow me. All that stuff, that came later. So there's a fourth part, an epilogue, an appendix, which details the group attestation to the author's veracity, the now dead author's veracity. A new addition to the text, chapter 21, verses 1 to 25. And finally, there is this weird later insertion. This is the fifth part of the Gospel according to John. Shoehorned into somewhere between the end of chapter 7 and the beginning of chapter 8, Jesus rescues a woman caught in adultery. It's a marvelous story, just fantastic, wonderful story. Doesn't really belong in the text, but you had to fit it somewhere, so they shoved it in. Moving right back to where we need to be focused today, John chapter 1, verses 6 to verse 14. There was a man, John chapter 1, verse 6 to 8 right now, let's look at again. There was a man sent from God whose name was Ioannes, whose name was John. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. By the way, when it says all might believe through him, who was John preaching to? Was John preaching to John the Dunker? Who was he preaching to? Was he preaching to all human beings of any ethnic group whatsoever?
No, just his social Israelites.
Israelites, his social circle. Right. So understand, when the Bible uses all, that's contextualized, right? All what? Like the light of humankind. Well, what humankind is the important humankind in the idea of the first author? That doesn't mean that we can exclude it to later spiritual understandings that do include the entire human race. We have to be careful with that, though, because that can carry us down some dark roads, like proselytizing people, especially the poor and indigenous persons, communities. However, having said that, no, this still doesn't mean that Christ doesn't have a role to play with the rest of humankind and the whole universe in the way we might think of universe and cosmos. But it gives us pause. What did the original author mean? What was his original intention when he says all, or humankind, light of humankind? We have to think about that. And it's very tempting, isn't it, to read our own ethnocentric and stuff that developed and took on theological freight, not necessarily illegitimately, 2,000 years of theological freight, and anachronistically and ethnocentrically read that back into the text, distorting what John actually intended. Okay? So we got to be careful with these words, all, and humankind. Okay, we'll talk about that. Back to the text. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. John the Dunker. Here is the first explicit notice that the cosmic conflict will move between light and dark that we read about in chapter 1, verses 1 to 5, will move from the imaginary time of God's beginning, which isn't really, if we saw time, right, like a line, like an arrow line, and to the left of the arrow line, there's like a starting point for that line, and to the right of that arrow line, we have an arrow, meaning times keep on going future, right? So to the left of that line, we could put beginning. That's the way we like to think of it. No, that's not true. Beginning is actually above the line. God's beginning is imagined as being above the line. Okay, that's where God's beginning is. That's what the Father and the Son, or the Word and God, share. That beginning. That's where they are, see? Above the line. So when we read about John the Dunker in chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, this is the first explicit notice that this cosmic conflict between light and dark that we heard about in the beginning, right, is going to move from that imaginary time of God's beginning into the present, which for Israelites, peasants, is everything known in living memory. Everything forthcoming the next day, and everything that's just happened in the previous days, right? The forthcoming, the living memory. It's kind of a thick present that really is the focus of these ancient people. They don't have leisure time, these ancient people, to sit around speculating about what life is going to be like hundreds of years from now, or to sit around reading books about what life was like, carefully scholarly researched 40,000 years before. They don't have a grasp of time like that. They perceive time very differently than we do. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why, like another author of the gospel of the New Testament literature, the author of the book of Revelation, could not possibly be writing about events taking place 2,000 years into the future. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Yes. He's got to be writing about what's forthcoming, or situations that he knows in his own living memory. Anything in the deep past or deep future, only God knows that. That's privy only to God, who is above time in the beginning. Interesting, right? Okay, so here we have the first explicit notice that this war between light and dark is going to move from that beginning into the present. While John the Dunker is acknowledged by the fourth gospel as God's intermediary or broker, a shamanic figure who can barter favors between alternate reality where God is, that above, right, and the consensual reality of the cultural world of John and his contemporaries in Israel, a prophet, a holy man, if you will, the author quickly makes it clear that John the Dunker himself was not the light coming into the world. And that's a way of saying that the mission of John the Dunker, important though it is, was not the messianic one. So when he says he's not the light, it's not the Messiah. Yes, Jan?
John the Baptist, isn't he the son of Elizabeth, the cousin of Mary?
That's according to Luke. It's Luke's infancy narrative, which doesn't really have apostolic witness. It's all true. The Bible's all true. Some of it actually happened. Are Catholics obligated to believe that Luke is giving us biographical history details there that have to be adhered to and accepted as if? The problem with that is this, Jan. John the Dunker is depicted very differently in the different Gospels that we encounter him in. How is it that in the other Gospels, John the Dunker doesn't even know Jesus if he was his cousin. Knowing what we know about from anthropology and the social sciences of how Middle Eastern people are closely knit in village life, wouldn't they be closely knit together? Wouldn't they know each other, one another? Very close, right? If you're a cousin, you might be getting married to John the Dunker's sister, right? Oh, maybe he didn't have a sister. You know how the story goes. But the story seems... And then we know that people didn't really get childhoods in the records of childhoods in the Middle East, in the Middle East of ancient world or Mediterranean of the ancient world, unless they died and became famous. John the Dunker died and became famous. So then you get a stereotyped childhood.
Yeah, but there isn't even a lot of acknowledgement of Jesus' childhood.
That's right. Jesus also got, in many ways, a very stereotypical child. I know it makes people go a little bit crazy. What are you saying, Bill? What are you suggesting here? I'm just saying that the church doesn't insist that we accept, the Bible is all true, but not every detail that the Bible gives or the Gospels give us are biographical fact. They weren't 21st century Western biographies. So, is John the Dunker and Jesus related? Are they related? All the Gospels would say they're related. They're sent from God. They're prophetic. Jesus is the Messiah. John the Dunker in the Synoptic Gospels prepares the way. In the fourth Gospel bears witness to that. They are martyred, right? And honored by God. So in that sense, yes, they are related. Do we have to accept, if we're in Luke, okay, they're cousins in Luke. But that has why did Luke write that? We'll have to explore that sometime.
Plus they were all written well after Jesus was dead.
Yes. Also the name of the cousin Elizabeth, Elisheva, right? The promise of God. Wow, that sounds like a very interesting name. And then her husband's name, Zechariah, right? Zechariah, right? Remember right? Yahweh. Elisheva, your promise, which is the gift of God, Yochanan, which is God's grace. That sounds very poetic, doesn't it? It sounds very interesting like that, huh? So we have to look at that. Luke has a beautiful infancy narrative, but we'll see. We'll explore. Okay. So the point in John, great question. The point of John, the fourth gospel, and John the Dunker, about John the Dunker is, even though he had an important mission, he wasn't the light. His mission was not the messianic one. The coming of light, therefore, according to the fourth gospel, is a messianic event. John chapter 1, verses 6 to 8. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. In verses 6 through 8, the elevated poetry of chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 disappears. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was turned toward God, and what God was, the Word also was. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. What was in him was life, and his life was the light of humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. Elevated poetry. And then there was, suddenly prose. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe. What happened to the poetry? What happened to the big cosmic sweep of poetry? It disappeared in verses 6 through 8. Here we encounter a more narrative description of the figure and role of John the Dunker. Seen as a clumsy insertion into a primitive hymn, many scholars regard John chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 as a later secondary addition. Nonetheless, according to the present structure and overall message of the fourth gospel, owing everything it has to say to John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, these verses, even if they were clumsily inserted into a hymn and don't reflect what the hymn originally looked like, are now essential and have to be treated as such. They're essential because they're giving us information. Remember I said, everything the fourth gospel wants to say, including verses 6 through 8 of chapter 1, are to be found in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. That includes verses 6 through 8. Clumsily added, disruptive though they may be, to the beauty of the original poem. Hints of the word's involvement in history have been given since John chapter 1, verse 3c to verse 5. What took place in him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. These hints continue in verse 6 with the introduction of an historical figure with a proper name, Ioannes, John, the dunker, who egeneto, enters into the story. Why don't we take a break?